Welcome, everyone, to this installment of the California Policy Forum. Today's topic is Lobbyists Ask Me Anything, AMA, Advocacy Tips from Capital Experts. Thank you for joining us. As the room fills up, we'd love to invite you to please share where you're joining us from. So your organization and also what part of California or even outside of California you might be joining us from this Tuesday morning. In the meantime, I will remind everyone what the California Policy Forum series is all about. This is an ongoing series of informational and educational webinars for California's nonprofits and funder community to navigate timely public policy issues and demystify the systems and the processes behind our statewide policy ecosystem, everything from budgets to ballot measures to today's focus on nonprofit advocacy and lobbying. A warm welcome again for those of you just joining. Please share a quick note in the chat to let us know where you're joining from, both your organization and what part of the state or what part of the world you're joining us from today. Welcome to Anna from Fresno. Thanks for joining us. I am your host, Laura Seaman. I'm with the League of California Community Foundations, and we're pleased to be a co-host of this ongoing webinar series, along with our friends and partners at CalNonprofits, Northern California Grantmakers, Southern California Grantmakers, and Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial counties. You will find an archive of past sessions of the California Policy Forum on the CalNonprofits website. You'll find a link to that coming at you soon in the chat, and also in a follow-up email that every registrant of this session will receive in just a couple of days, with a recording of the session, and then also some resources from our wonderful guest speakers who you'll meet in just a moment, and anything else that comes through the chat that we think is useful to follow up with. I want to say a note, share a note of solidarity and support while we introduce ourselves in the chat. To our friends and our colleagues in the LA region, our hearts are with you as we enter another challenging week of historic wildfire impacts. These communities and all communities in California affected by fires, floods, earthquakes, and more are facing a long road to recovery, and the nonprofits that are embedded in these communities, they are and they will continue to be essential to rebuilding lives and communities and to building longer-term resilience overall for all Californians. And it's just one more reason that our social sector here in the state is increasingly looking at all the tools in the toolbox to support communities and to build a more thriving future for all Californians, including through public policy advocacy and lobbying, which is the focus of today's exploration. A few notes of housekeeping on our next slide. The Zoom setup for this webinar includes both a chat and a Q&A. We ask that you please use the Q&A primarily for your questions of the panelists or of the team behind the California Policy Forum series. You can use the chat box to introduce yourselves, as I hope that you're doing now. Welcome to everyone who's sharing where they're joining us from. We'll also keep an eye on the chat for any questions that come through. If you'd like to see closed captions of today's session live, you can click that CC Show Captions button toward the bottom of your screen. And then if you have a tech issue, there is an option within the chat to message directly one of our colleagues behind the scenes. That account is named Event Tech, CalNonprofits. So you can let them know if you're having a technical issue. Again, this will be recorded and sent out. So let's get going. Our agenda today includes a very high-level overview to just set the context of what is advocacy and lobbying. How should nonprofits be thinking about this space? I do want to share that this is not a legal advice session, and we are not providing specific legal guidance to any individual nonprofits in this session. It's really an exploration of the field of lobbying and advocacy, and some insights from Capital insiders and tips on how to use this tool in the toolbox generally. We will put a link in the chat to our friends at Boulder Advocacy, an initiative of Alliance for Justice, who have a very robust toolkit, webinar learning series, all sorts of resources, guides, fact sheets about nonprofit lobbying and advocacy specifically that could be a great starting point for any nonprofit that is just getting started on this journey. We'll then go to a roundtable discussion with our four lobbyist guest speakers today, and of course make plenty of time for your Q&A since this is an AMA and Ask Me Anything. Next slide, please. High level, what is advocacy? The takeaway here that we want everyone to leave with is that all lobbying is a form of advocacy. Not all advocacy is lobbying. So when we think about the toolbox of advocacy, lobbying is one tool. Advocacy can include things like public education about an issue, climate change, food security, women's rights, etc. It can include nonpartisan research and analysis, nonpartisan voter engagement activities, things like grassroots organizing, coalition building, and it can include lobbying. And once we get into the realm of lobbying, if you'll go to the next slide, there are a couple of flavors of lobbying, and this will determine the more specific points of tracking, reporting, limits that a nonprofit organization would need to keep track of and comply with if they go in this direction. The two types we want to highlight are direct lobbying and grassroots lobbying. Direct lobbying is activity that is specifically targeted or communicated to a legislator, including the staff of a legislator's office, about specific legislation that expresses a view about that legislation, including an ask to either support or oppose a bill, for example. Grassroots lobbying is advocacy that expresses maybe the same view about the same legislation to the public with a call for action. For example, call your legislators about this bill. Next slide, please. A quick note, because this call and this series are for both nonprofit and funder organizations. All foundations can make grants to a nonprofit that lobbies. Some caveats here: private foundations particularly are a little more restricted in their activity. They can make a general support grant to a nonprofit that does lobbying, but the grant cannot be for lobbying. It cannot be explicitly earmarked for lobbying activities. Private foundations also could make a project support grant to a project that includes a component of lobbying as part of the activity of the funded project. And there are limits here about how much the foundation can put toward that project in terms of how much is allocated for lobbying and not for lobbying within that grantee project budget. Community foundations, which of course are also public charities, they can do all of the above, and they also can make grants that are explicitly earmarked for lobbying. And a note to our community foundation colleagues on the call, those would count toward community foundation's own lobbying limits, and so you'll want to look at the restrictions and filing and reporting requirements for that. But really, the message here is that there's quite a lot of leeway in terms of both advocacy and lobbying activity for nonprofits, as well as funding that kind of activity for foundations. And again, we would point you toward resources like what nonprofits need to know about lobbying in California, which is a really, really robust and practical guide from Alliance for Justice's Boulder Advocacy Program, and that link is now in the chat. Next slide, please. So what can a lobbyist do for a nonprofit? They primarily serve the role of representing a nonprofit or a nonprofit coalition's views to lawmakers, to influence legislation and government decision-making. They can also help to navigate and demystify the process of policymaking and also policy issues. And really, they can beef up the capacity and the toolbox of a nonprofit or a group of nonprofits to use all the levers to pursue their mission. And that's more of what we're going to hear about from our speakers today. So let's introduce them and start to hear from them. We are delighted to be joined by Jennifer Fearing, who is not only president of Fearless Advocacy, but is CalNonprofits' own advocate in Sacramento. Welcome, Jennifer. We'll also hear from Kathy Mossberg, who's partner at Mosaic Solutions and Advocacy. Welcome, Kathy. Christopher Sanchez is joining us. He is founder of Mesa Verde Group, and Sedalia King is Associate Director of Government Relations for Catalyst California. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start by asking all panelists, maybe in that order, to share their own introductions and touch on a few initial questions, including how did you get started as a lobbyist, and what are the causes that motivated you to become an advocate for the nonprofit sector? What do people commonly misunderstand about your job, or what do you wish that more people knew? And what do you know now? What's one thing you know now? I bet there's more than one that you didn't when you first started that's proven really valuable. So let's start off with CalNonprofits advocate in Sacramento, Jennifer Fearing.
Hi, Laura. Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. And hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm happy to be spending my morning not only with colleagues in this sector, but with my lobbying colleagues here. We have a really impressive group of advocates representing nonprofits in Sacramento. Excited to be asked anything this morning. I'm here in Sacramento, and I've been in Sacramento for quite some time. And my pathway to becoming a lobbyist actually started in an entirely different career. I was an economist for about a decade in the private sector. And I found a stray dog about 10 years into that career and found my way to my local animal shelter. And like many others before me, I fell down a bit of a rabbit hole, caring about companion animals and pet overpopulation. And in my personal life, really just took off. Started my own nonprofit that was the first low cost and affordable spay-neuter programming and dog rescue. So very hands-on, but where I basically learned to become a lobbyist at the local government level while advocating for changes and more resources for our local animal shelter. So pretty soon, my day job was a frustrating thing to have to be part of, and I wanted to spend all of my time advocating. And I left to go to a nonprofit that primarily does animal disaster relief. So I know a lot of my former colleagues and newer colleagues are doing that work, that heavy lifting in the Los Angeles area. And with my deep empathy and appreciation, it is incredibly hard and challenging and emotional work. And that is part of why I actually transitioned after a few years after responding to disasters like Katrina. I realized that logistics and disaster response, as important as it is, like my passion was for trying to change the conditions that lead to those circumstances, whether it's trying to, directly advocate for better welfare and treatment of animals so they don't end up in harm's way, needing, suffering and needing human support, but also the broader environmental conditions that create, crazy intense adverse weather that leads to so many challenges. So kind of that's the through line. So my causes started, I started as an animal advocate, but I definitely work a lot more in environmental justice and broader nonprofit sector support in my work here in Sacramento. I think what frustrates me, what people misunderstand about my job and what I wish people knew better. I will say I never miss an opportunity, and certainly not in this forum, to remind everyone that nonprofits can lobby. Laura said it. Not only can they lobby, they should be lobbying. And that's, not deriding any nonprofit who is fundamentally hands-on and advocacy doesn't fit, but for anyone who is trying to change sort of human circumstances or improve their community, lobbying is a key tool that certainly must be evaluated. And if your voices are not present in the appropriation of the California state budget or in the development of new laws that impact the way life is run in California, then somebody else is driving and influencing those decisions. And so it's changing a lot. It's getting better over time, but for a long time, I've just been frustrated by how many times I will hear people who have been in the nonprofit sector for a long time assert that 501c3 organizations cannot lobby. That is simply not true. And the Boulder advocacy resources here are really helpful for elucidating the laws around that. I think it's more our job to make the case for the why, not the how. I'll also just say a common misperception of our job is who a lobbyist is. I think, the movies and scandals and other ways that lobbyists may be portrayed. If you don't know a lobbyist, you might have not a favorable impression of lobbyists. So I actually really like to use that title to help demystify, and change people's perceptions of that, because in California, a lobbyist is defined as being one of two things. If you work for a nonprofit organization or a company and what's called an in-house lobbyist position, you are defined as a lobbyist if a third of your compensated time is spent communicating with, elected officials or their staff. So, and if you are someone like us, most of us here, I think, except for Sedalia, we are contract lobbyists. If we receive at least $2,000 in a calendar month for the purpose of communicating with elected officials, that makes us a lobbyist under the law in California, and frankly triggers certain disclosure and reporting and registration responsibilities. But that is what actually makes someone a lobbyist, like that you are compensated for the purpose of communicating with officials. So you can be, all lobbyists choose who they are willing to do that work for. And what you have assembled today are folks who have opted to almost exclusively do that on behalf of nonprofits or organizations who are more white hat causes trying to improve life for the betterment of all people and the environment, as opposed to a particular company or corporate entity. Lastly, your question around what do I know now that I didn't know? The best advice I've ever received, I don't even know if it was in a lobbying context, but it serves me well as a lobbyist, is to, information is the currency of our work, like learning things that other people don't know, so-called intel, learning it faster than other people have it to be able to make kind of quick pivots and decisions and execute in a strategic manner. The trick to our work is determining what information we get is interesting versus actionable. And I find that constantly kind of running that filter through information that I come across helps me make the best decisions, the most strategic decisions for my clients. Gossip, which travels a lot through our world, is always interesting, almost never actionable. And I have learned the hard way as well that sometimes I panic when I'll see a full page ad by someone who's working against my interest, maybe even saying uncharitable things about our work in a newspaper. That is definitely going to pique my interest, but maybe no one in the building sees it. Maybe it's actually not actionable. And so slowing my role in terms of reacting to things like that, but to see if they're actually having an impact on the work before making sure everyone in the Capitol sees it because I pointed at it. So the interesting versus actionable dynamic is something that I am really grateful to utilize and to pass along here.
Great advice. Thank you, Jennifer. Kathy, how about you?
Having you today, really appreciate the invite and the time.
Kathy, you're a little quiet. That might just be me, but just want to flag that.
Is that better?
Just a bit. You might have to shout at us today, Kathy.
Try it one more time. Is that better? Sorry to spend
much
time
better.
on this.
Thank you so much.
Okay, just kicked it. That's another lesson. Just kick it on the IT. Thanks again for having me. If everyone didn't hear that, appreciate the time. I started this work kind of in college. And even before that, grew up in kind of a low-income family. A lot of it was related to unwanted and untimed sort of pregnancies and family planning issues, and sort of saw that as I grew up, went to college, also had some, at that point, HIV and AIDS kind of crisis was in full swing, had a lot of friends impacted, started to get interested in both repro rights as well as HIV and AIDS policy. And then that led me to sort of health and human services more generally, and then sometimes more specifically public health policy. And I think that's where I started to look at the end of college for internships. I did start this all out thinking lobbying was gross and not the best place, not certainly where I wanted to be. Did at the end of sort of college read a book where it did talk about called Giant Killers. It did deal with nonprofit lobbying, and found that kind of intriguing. Realized as I left college, didn't have a job, started to apply for internships, and realized I was sort of drawn to advocacy work in Sacramento. So started out with Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California. I worked there on repro rights. Started out as the intern, and as a lot of nonprofits go, as you all know, there's not a lot of funding. And so they basically just said, hey, do you want to come on and be the second lobbyist? I very much lucked out there. And so lobbying started right then and there. Been lobbying ever since. And so now I'm sort of closing in on my 28th year of lobbying. I had 16 years of lobbying, as I said, in the beginning with Planned Parenthood. So as what we call an in-house lobbyist. I then went again. I was asked to take on a couple of contracts. And I think this is the theme of my work. I was like, oh, that doesn't sound very appealing. I don't want to be a contract lobbyist. That sounds gross. And I, of course, needed to move, and so took it. I then was a contract lobbyist on my own for 16 years. And I think the points Jennifer raises, and she's brought it up, and others will bring this up as well. You find that you can do some really good work lobbying exclusively. I've generally lobbied exclusively for nonprofit groups throughout my entire career. And so the work that we do and can do along with all that you do is incredibly important for all the reasons Jennifer has said. So did that for 16 years on my own, started another firm that I was with for 8 years, and then moved from that firm and started another firm. So I have been with my current firm, Mosaic Solutions and Advocacy, for the last 3 years, moving into our 4th year. And again, my focus is generally health and human services, and all exclusively nonprofits. I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and I am a part of the problem, is kind of, ooh, lobbying, that's gross. What do you do, and why is it important? And isn't this just a bunch of cheese balls working in this land of Sacramento and DC? And I think that what I'm always happy to talk to folks about is the work that we do on behalf of the clients that we serve, and certainly the work that they do on the ground level, and how important it is. And to Jennifer's point, if we are not here, if your voice is not here, the other voices rule the day, and those voices win on the policy issues. And so while there's a lot of complaining to do after that, it's better to have your voice heard. I think another thing I learned really early on, and it has sort of been important as I work and move forward on how I conduct myself, how I put forward information, is this is as much as initially it seemed very large, this is Sacramento, and the policy world is very small. There are connections constantly with, you meet this person and they know that person, or I may have worked on a bill with one office or one member and it didn't go great, but it's best to make sure that the experience is as best as you can do it, and make sure that you keep your integrity, you make sure you're being honest in your conduct, because you will no doubt come across that same member, staffer, whoever it may be, whether they be in the administration, department. It is just an incredibly small world. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Over to Christopher Sanchez next.
Hi, good morning, buenos dias, everybody. My name is Christopher Sanchez. I'm the founder of the Mesa Verde Group. And just like everyone else, I'm a contract lobbyist. Well, not everyone else, but a contract lobbyist who only represents nonprofit organizations. And I'm someone who had no idea what a lobbyist was when I got into the world of politics. It was in my younger years, when there was a city council member who wanted to destroy and remove murals, Chicano murals that were painted in the 1970s from the community that I grew up in. That those murals were images of lowriders and zoot suiters, images that represented my family. And I started mobilizing folks in my community, saying, hey, like, this is gonna happen. Like, I know your tia, your mom, or so-and-so had painted those murals, and or so-and-so's mom down the street painted those murals. I think we should all kind of go to city council and say something. So I started mobilizing my community back in Fullerton, the town that I live in, and we restored and saved the murals. Today the murals are being saved. But at that moment, someone who was my political mentor had found talent in me and said, you know, you're really good at what you do. People really respond to you really well. I'd like to take you under my wing. So by luck, kind of landed into politics, working on campaigns, and so forth. I stay in this work because throughout my time in those first beginning years, I would hear conversations about people from my community being talked about negatively, saying that we were taking advantage of the system and saying a lot more lies about who we are and who we weren't. And I knew if they were willing to say it in front of me, that I had to stay in politics. There was no ifs, ands, or buts that this had to be the career I had to choose. I was fortunate enough to come up to the state capitol in 2013 and work in the legislature for 4 years. And then after the 2016 election, I made the decision to go out and start as an advocate or an in-house lobbyist with CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane Immigrant Rights, because I was down to fight Donald Trump every day to represent immigrant communities. And that's kind of led my trajectory into in the world of lobbying. As a contract lobbyist, I think the one thing that I've seen where folks don't really understand what we do, or maybe the other way, is like this is a very new world to them. Is a lot of the clients that I represent have never hired a lobbyist, and they don't know what it looks like, and they don't understand what their power can be in Sacramento. And I think that this relationship is very different for them, and so I think that is a very big myth for them because of what they see on TV and everything else. Um, and then I would just say the things that I know today that I wish I knew when I first started is like solidarity is an action and not a word. And I can tell you the moments of times that I've been in coalition with folks, and I remember being where we were lobbying on a specific issue in the middle of a governor and legislative negotiation during a budget process. And once we found out a deal was cut, half the deal was for half the coalition, and the other piece that was not included was for the folks that I was representing. And so it was me and one other person, the rest of the coalition left us. And so being creative in those times when you're alone and you're the only one standing there, and moving forward and not letting anything stop you is the lesson I learned early on.
Christopher, thank you for sharing that part of your origin story as lobbyist. Over now to Sedalia King from Catalyst, California.
Good morning. Thank you so much again for having me. Again, my name is Sedalia King. I am the Associate Director of Government Relations for Catalyst, California, and the sole in-house lobbyist on this panel. I didn't realize that until everyone made that announcement. So just kind of diving a little deeper into that, the difference between or what I'm seeing as, or what I've experienced as a difference between in-house lobbying versus contracting is that contractors, they have like a number of folks that they do have to report to and provide updates for when it comes to the work that they're doing here in the legislature. Um, and on my end, I only have to report to one organization. Like they decided that they for the structure of their organization, they wanted to have someone literally in-house to take care of all their lobbying and advocacy needs. So it's always fascinating to hear contract lobbyists talking about how uh, their clients' compliments or might be some conflicts, or just navigating all that is very interesting. But also, I sense that there are some elements that are similar because given the way how my organization set up, like we do have like program areas that we have to report to and provide updates. So it's really interesting to see the overlap and also a little bit of the differences. So my origin story of how I got into lobbying was the fact that I was lobbied. I was a former staffer in the legislature. I got my start in, I started as an intern, and then I was intern in the Speaker's press office. Then I got an internship with a labor union, ASME, the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees. Still got it. And once I finished my internship there, then I got picked up by Assemblymember Cheryl Brown, who at the time represented the San Bernardino area. And that was in 2026 or 2016. And And that was also a year she was up for re-election, and unfortunately she lost her re-election bid. And I was like, oh my God, I lost my job, and like Donald Trump is president. Kind of weird spot, like that this keeps coming up again. Uh but it was through like the networking that I had done that folks remembered me and they brought me onto their team. This time went from Speaker Atkins to Pro Tem Atkins, and she remembered me as her intern. She brought me onto her team when she went over to the Senate. And so during those periods of time, so overall it was about like 4.5 years being in the building, um, I was constantly lobbied, and me being a newer staffer, like a baby staffer, and I wanted to show up, I wanted to do really well and show my chops. So I actually kind of developed a reputation among some of the lobbyists that I was like, I asked a lot of questions, and like, Sedalia, like, you need to come in prepared for her. And because my position was, if I don't understand it, then there's no way I can be able to explain it to the senator or to the assembly member. So I really wanted to make sure I understood everything. So I built off a reputation for like really engaging with lobbyists. And then also some of the issues that they were advocating for were like really interesting, or there was times when I felt like I could probably lobby it better. Um, but it got to a point where here in Sacramento, uh, I was born and raised here first off, and the Stephon Clark murder happened, and there was tons of movement happening in the legislature. And given the fact that at the time I was also working for leadership, so I also couldn't uh, tweet as much as I wanted to, because it wouldn't be like Sedalia is tweeting this. It'd be like, oh, pro tem staffer said this. And so there was like a really heavy weight to carry that I was very cognizant of. Um, and love Senator Atkins, and I would never want to put her in a position then or now that would cause harm. But also I wanted to stay true to like what I wanted to do and where my values were. So there was a couple lobbyists that approached me, or they didn't necessarily approach me, but it was they lobbied me like normal, and it was actually like a teaching association. It was for community college faculty, and they were talking and advocating on the legislation. I was like, wait, what does faculty have to do with this? But they had like this whole racial justice lean, and they were very forward facing on it and really engaging on it. And that's when it clicked for me that like, oh, there's possibilities to do more. In addition, like we're focusing on like higher education, which I'm also a transfer student, um, but also be able to tap into those other spaces. So that opened a whole new world for me. And they had a position come up, and that's when I took it. And so I was there for about a year, and I got to um, really engage and step into that work, and also find my voice, my independent voice amongst all that. So I did that for about a year, and then um, not too long after that, I found out about Catalyst California. At the time, it was called Advancement Project California, and they were a racial justice nonprofit that was based out in LA. And so, whereas like the Faculty Association, like they had like a stake in the ground for it, but Catalyst, like that's who they were. So I found an opportunity to like step my game up even more so and really lean on to my values, because that's where my focus was. I really want to lean in my values, find my voice, find my policy chops, and really do some advocacy work that I could be proud of for in the future. My parents were activists, and I grew up in a household knowing that when they came to like the 1960s and 70s and all the things that were going on there, like they could tell me exactly what they were doing and how they were doing. They had photo evidence, like they lived that. So me growing up and experiencing our world, I wanted to have that same opportunity. Like if anyone were to ask me, I have a very solid response, and ultimately being on the right side of history. So I sort of blossomed from there. And some of the connotations around lobbying, and this is something that I also had to work around when I was a staffer as well, is that like when you hear the word lobbyist, or even when I introduce myself as a lobbyist, you have to be like, oh no, not like one of the bad ones. I'm one of the good ones. And part of that's also because of DC, and DC is going to DC, but um but folks also have to realize that for all those like terrible experiences, there are also folks who are on the right side of things who are doing really great work, including everyone here. And maintaining a reputation, maintaining your integrity, and open access, and just doing really good work, and not necessarily oft in the shadows. There are shadowy lobbyists, but we very much firmly stand in the light. Um, but like, don't let lobbying turn you away. Don't let this advocacy work turn you away. It's absolutely necessary. And someone hit at it earlier, was that like, not everyone has the time or money or the funds to be able to do this work. But the fact that like, and some folks just don't have like the mental capacity to do it. Like, I'll worry about it during elections time when when my ballot comes up, and at that point it's sometimes it's too late. So like, when you're not engaging, when you're not thinking about lobbying or like the legislation or what's going on up here, there is someone who is. There is someone who does have the money, who does have the time, who does have the mental capacity, and they're going to take advantage of the fact that you're absent. So, even though I am here, I have a small, mighty team of 3, and we do tend to be stretched a little thin, but it's absolutely necessary given the communities that we represent and the coalitions that we're a part of, including the folks here. And even the folks here, like, we might not work together directly, but we keep showing up in the same committee hearing rooms, and we keep seeing each other, and we're always standing in solidarity with each other. And that sort of consistency is make or break every time. So, if anything, I want to encourage folks to do what they can, even if it's just like a copy paste of an email blast that we might send out to encourage folks, retweeting or whatever the new social media is, because I know there's lots of turmoil happening. But just phone calls, or just whatever you can do that might just take at best maybe like 2 minutes. It definitely makes or breaks, and it provides the space for us to be able to do our work that much better, because it's definitely helpful when we show up, but there's also a great experience when there's a choir behind us, that members are like, oh, well, I'm getting calls, I'm hearing folks, I'm hearing from my constituents, and the lobbyist is here. So they're going to feel that momentum building. So we are mighty independently, but we're so much better as a collective. So do not be afraid of lobbyists. Do not be afraid of advocacy. You are a necessary part of this system.
Dahlia, thank you so much. And I'm going to co-opt the last thing that you said, which is that we're so much stronger together, and use that as an opportunity to plug CalNonprofits. If you're not a member, you should be. The League is a proud member of this coalition, and we really are stronger together, including on the policy side. This is the part, thank you everyone for the intros, the origin stories, and already a sprinkling of tips and tricks. We're not at questions yet, but we're going to harvest some advice from these folks. So we already have some great questions coming through in the Q&A. Please do keep those coming. I'm going to circle to Christopher first and ask what advice that you would share. What advice do you share with your nonprofit or philanthropy clients about how to be the most effective advocate in Sacramento? Are there top tips that you rely on? And I'll weave in a question that's come through in the Q&A. What is helpful in terms of sustaining relationships with legislators when you're not talking to them about a specific bill? So the sort of the off season, if you will.
Perfect. So I want to talk about kind of advocacy with philanthropy, but then how philanthropy is very helpful, and then go into the nonprofits and weave in the question. So philanthropy, you're very, very powerful in the sense, of the amount of influence you have. You all know it. And while you might not be able to do, direct communication on taking a position of a bill or so forth, only because so many of you have told me that. There's other ways to express your interest to legislators, and that's kind of the what do you do in the off season, or other than talk about directly a bill, and that's really showing what you care about, right? Connecting legislators to some of the grantees that you have and some of the projects that you're funding, and giving them a tour if you're funding a preserve, or showing them a facility of a nonprofit that's doing excellent work, or providing legal services and so forth. So that's some of that stuff. I do want to speak directly to philanthropy on as far as a strategy. When you're providing grants for advocacy, I would request and kind of encourage you to take a holistic approach to this work. For organizations that are legal services or grassroots, they might need to the grassroots members might need to take a day off of work, and they might have a child that they need to bring to Sacramento, and or there might be translation services. And so how do we ensure that those people have meals and that their family's taken care of, and so forth, and that the workers at the nonprofit don't have to work as an organizer and as a translator at the same time. I think that's something that's really important, to take a holistic approach to funding advocacy. For the nonprofits, I want to encourage you to be so creative, and don't think it's done. Just be creative in your advocacy. I think that's one thing that makes me thrive in this space, and that where I'm able to sit down with a nonprofit and say, okay, let me see your tools and what do you have, and let's just utilize all of them. I'll give you a great example. They're not a client, but I'm a fan of them. The California Domestic Workers Alliance. They bring in their Swifters, and they bring in Clorox boxes and everything to show, to use as prompts, but also to use as a tool as advocacy to inform members of the legislature about what their needs are and the bills that they're trying to pass. That's super creative, right? And it gets the message across, because why is somebody handing an empty Clorox box to a staffer? So that would be some of the advice I would give.
Great advice to kick us off. Thank you, Christopher. Kathy, I have a question for you. For organizations with limited resources, what does that mean? What guidance would you share to help them deliver let's say, an outsized impact when it comes to advocacy efforts? How can nonprofits punch above their weight in advocacy and lobbying?
Yeah, good question. And I think a lot of what we've already talked about, and then sort of where Christopher was headed on this, gets us there in some ways. And I think even what you mentioned, Laura, on joining CalNonprofits, I think that one of the things that folks can do if you do not have the ability to have your own lobbyist, which many people do not, is joining an association, a like-minded association, an association that makes sense for what you do. You can get sort of an outsized you can do more in that environment. In that environment, you can also, again, based on your time, you can sort of scale up, scale down. You may be one of their main voices. You may be the one who provides sort of, here's what we do on the ground. Or to Chris's point, the other thing to do is, and I cannot say this enough, and certainly it's better in the off season, and off season for us is the fall, just so everyone understands that. It's sort of when session ends and before it begins again in January, is bringing people out. If you have no money, working at the local level, talking to members, basically just introducing yourselves, telling them what you do, how it impacts their community, and bringing them out to show what you do. You will be incredible. It's surprising. We represent the food banks for a number of years, and I think always a chance to bring members out to see what each and every food bank's different, but sort of see what food banks do. And also staff you can bring out with them. You can bring out the legislative analyst's office. You can bring out finance. You can do a lot in inviting folks to come out just to see what you do. And you will be surprised, people who thought they knew what you did, and they really have a different appreciation once they see at the local level. But to me, it would be joining a larger group, making sure you're working at your local level, bringing folks out, and then showing them what you do and what the impact is locally.
Absolutely. Thank you. So Dahlia, let's do some real talk about what not to do. What mistakes do you think are most common? Let's say that the groups that you've worked with, or that you, on either side, being lobbied or lobbying, make when they are engaging with legislative staff. What not to do? I see a lot of nods and smiles. I think we all maybe have input on this. So let's start with you, Sedalia.
Yeah. So the one thing that I think I communicate to folks worldwide is to make things plain. Keep it plain. I love the approach of like when you go into and talk to folks about like really complex policy, and just keep in mind, like, members are people too. Like, these are folks who came up from the very similar neighborhoods and and we're talking about the California legislature. I'm not talking about Congress or anything like that. But these are folks who they usually have like an everyday background. A lot of these folks just felt empowered and decided to go ahead and run for office. They took a risk. So they're here and they're trying to figure things out too. So I love the idea of just going in and explaining things or explaining these complex policies, these complex decisions as if you're 5 years old. Like, because those, if you have the ability to explain things in a really simplified format, something that's easy to remember, then the likelihood of members be able to like retain that information, to be able to act upon it, and also to talk to their colleagues about it, these other folks who are decision makers, that's what's also going to make or break whether or not what you're advocating for sees it to the governor's desk and possibly becoming law. And I can't emphasize that enough, because even like something that I had to like talk through some of our folks internally at Catalyst, because we're nerds. We love research. We love like the thick booklets, the white papers and things like that. Like, it's very academic. And so even coming into here, it is like sort of when you get out of college and you find out no one wants to read like a 30-page paper, no one wants to write a 30-page paper. So no one, yeah. So like leaving college and realizing like, oh, like everything's an email, like less than 300 words, and kind of getting used to that environment. So definitely coaching Catalyst to like, let's leave, like, love the research, definitely have that available because it should be available. But you need like a fact sheet, a 1-pager. You need like a 30-second elevator speech. And even better, if you can come up with like a really cool tagline, like an earworm, that's something that will just nest into someone's brain and they can never forget it. Like, these are the things that like folks can bookmark and return to. And also, it's not just for members, it's also for the public, because especially if folks are on the go, if you can get something that's accessible to members and the public, then that's just like such a huge winning dynamic. Because it's definitely, we're stronger together, but if you can do something with a united voice that's accessible and so simplified that even your opposition can't really work around it, because you made it too easy to attach your identity, your lived experience to, that's like an unshakable hold. So like, if anything, I want to encourage folks to be creative and like definitely flesh out your wings there, but also make it plain, explain it as if you're 5. If a 5-year-old can walk away like chanting your little talking points, then that's a huge win, because again, that's what we're going to see, like really lean, what even members lean in. They might not recognize it, but that's what they tend to lean into when like you hear about like, these really big bills or what talking points in news and media. So yeah.
Right. Thank you. And Jennifer, what would you offer to us on the what not to do front?
Sure, I would just offer a few things, and I know all of these from experience, both learning the hard way and bringing. Lots of us have a lot of experience. A common advocacy tool of nonprofits are lobby days. Where you bring constituents and citizen advocates and folks who don't do these things for a living, but who do have the lived experience, and they are from the districts. Those folks coming to Sacramento to personalize and bring home from a district perspective the issues we're trying to move are super important. But some of the things that we coach, in those environments is, not being irked that you came all this way and you're meeting with a fellow, or a very junior staffer. To dovetail, part of the same reason undergirding why Sedalia is right that you have to distill things way down is, there's close to 2,000 bills introduced in a given year. These legislative staffs, while compared to other states, are large. They're small for the volume of information and the tasks, the pace that things are moving at. So by the same token, offices, they're divvying up policy areas and workloads to their staff, and they run the gamut, right? From very, very brand new, right out of college folks, but let's be clear, top of their class, like super motivated, smart folks at the beginning of their career, up to, seasoned professionals who've been in the building for 20 years and who by far, probably hold more institutional and policy knowledge than anybody else. Those folks are divvying up the work within that office. And when you come all this way. You may get a like passing hello from the member as they rush off, to a committee hearing, and they'll be glad to see you, but they're counting on you delivering the stories and the information to them and imparting that with respect and brevity to their staffer. And even if, again, I've seen folks get upset that like it's a junior staffer and we had to go in the hall, their offices are not very big. Like you're probably going to end up in the hall. So not dismissing that opportunity, realizing that the members are counting on the advice and counsel of that staffer they will be communicating. So the clearer and briefer you're communicating that, the more they can pass that along. A common mistake is to talk too much, to like divvy up your time amongst your group and then realize you step out in the hall and go, we had 15 minutes. We know nothing about where that member is on this issue. Like we spent the whole time telling them where we are, and we don't have any more insight than when we went in about whether they're aligned with us and what other efforts we might need to go to get them aligned with us. So making sure you're saving plenty of time and treating that meeting as the beginning of a relationship, not the entirety of like the only opportunity you'll ever have to see this person or meet with them. So you're like talking as fast as you can and shoving it all in, just treating it more as the beginning, getting their card, staying in touch, following up. And I guess that goes to my third mistake is when you get asked a question by a member or staff that you don't know the answer to, feeling the need to fill that space with an answer, even if you don't know it. Please don't do that. And in fact, I like to pivot and say, saying I don't know is awesome. Not only do you not have a thing you don't have to go figure out how to undo because you said the wrong thing to someone who doesn't know you. They don't know if you made an honest mistake or we're trying to be, a little fast and loose with the facts. That's hard to fix. When you say I don't know and take their card, you follow through. You say, I'm going to research that and get back to you. That gives you this opportunity to have that meeting be the basis of the beginning of a relationship rather than maybe the end of a relationship, because and a detriment to the overall effort. So those are just a few things that come to mind for me.
Thanks for that, Jennifer. While we have you, how would you recommend, if this is compelling to nonprofit or funder folks listening in, that they go about thinking about how to identify and hire a lobbyist? How does it work?
That's a really good question, and I'm sure there might be different opinions here, but I'll just give a first crack. For starters, so the Secretary of State, we're all required to be registered, our firms, and then as lobbyists, we are required to be registered with the California Secretary of State, and then we are required to report on a quarterly basis how much we were paid by those clients, and those clients are required to report what we lobbied, what they paid us to work on. So I recommend initially starting if you don't know anyone with a lobbyist, I guess I should have said, if you know another organization who has representation in Sacramento that they're happy with, cast a net to some of your colleague organizations and see if they have anyone they'd recommend. But if you're kind of starting cold, you can go on the Secretary of State's website and go under lobbyist employers, and you're going to see an alphabetized list of the names of organizations, companies, associations, et cetera, that all maintain a presence, have either in-house or contract lobbyists in Sacramento, and look for organizations that you share values with or have common cause with, or you might spark a memory that someone there, and you will be able to click on them and see who they have hired, and that would be another path for communicating. I think I'll open it up to my other, I guess I'll just say, once you have identified some folks, I would just also, you need to look very closely at that lobbying firm's full client list. I would really recommend, don't want to have a firm, even if they tell you, and PS is a little super piece of advice. There are firms that will tell you, oh, don't mind that Exxon, is one of our clients. We have like a firewall. Like we don't, that's a different lobbyist and I don't really ever talk to them. No. I mean, I'm not calling them a liar. Maybe they think they're trying to do that. But the fact of the matter is, even if you're working specifically with a lobbyist at a firm that has maybe 5, 10, 20 lobbyists, that firm ought to be able to throw any of their people at any time as needed into getting getting your organizations like goals across the finish line. You don't want anyone who would have a conflict of interest or would not be able, if needed, to throw every single person and every relationship they have into helping. You don't want bills sitting at the governor's desk and one member of that firm is trying to get it vetoed and another person in that firm works for you is trying to get it signed. So the decision about being comfortable with conflicts is on the nonprofit. Like the lobbyists don't have to be comfortable. I mean, they can say they're comfortable with it. That's not the point. Your organization needs to be comfortable that everyone else that you're either agnostic about everyone else they represent or you're happy about it. But anybody who you as an organization could see yourself opposed to or who you just do not feel, they're working against broader interests you care about in the world, you do not want to share a lobbying firm that with someone who has one or more of those kinds of clients.
Great.
Kathy, how else would you?
I'm going to invite the other
all the points. Yeah, sorry, Laura.
I was going to say, in the interest of time, and a note to our audience, we will go to 11:15, so we do have some wiggle room. But I would invite broadly our panelists to respond to any of these questions in the chat alongside our conversation here. Kathy, I'm about to come back to you because we need to dig into this legislative session, don't we? In the interim, let me swing back over to Christopher and ask you to chime in on a question that's come through the chat. You mentioned creativity as a core value of how you approach lobbying. And so on that front, or in that spirit, we have a question that we've been talking about lobbying legislators in the state Senate and the state assembly. Are there other entities, are there other people that you lobby to or that nonprofits should think about advocating to within this broader work?
Yeah, I mean, any government entity you touch, I opened my firm with the intent just to lobby California legislators, and policymaking bodies, agencies, departments, and so forth. But last year I went to Mexico to go lobby the American federal government in Mexico for immigration issues. I lobbied the LA City Council last year as well. So it's more about the skill set of strategy sometimes than it is relationships. It just depends on the work.
Great. Thanks for that. All right, let's talk about where we are now. So we have just kicked off a new 2-year legislative session. So it's the 2025 and 26 session. And Kathy, would you give us your take on what's the legislative landscape, the overall political landscape in Sacramento as we kick off 2025 with a bang? What's going to define the kind of flavor of policymaking you think this year and next?
Yeah, so, and just like lots of other years, but different a bit. And I think we thought we knew the lay of the land last week when we started to get together to talk about this, coming together today. And that landscape, and no pun intended on that landscape changed. And it changed drastically with everything that's happening in LA and everything that the communities down there are going through and all the effort that's going to have to be placed on housing, insurance, cleanup. I mean, we thought we were going to, before that, we thought our big issues this year were going to be, let's make sure we can kind of stay within the confines of a budget that last year had a $47 billion deficit. And now we also know we have a federal administration that's in conflict many times, if not always, we'll see, with California values and policies, and having to deal with that and what that implication is for both policy, but more broadly our budget. And we've just now, world changes. We've got these terrible fires that have broken out in LA and all of the issues that those local communities are dealing with and all those things that I just stated. We're going to see the legislature this year have to deal with climate change in a more direct way. Jennifer and I were talking just before we came on about how we have a climate bond. There was a portion that was a decent sum of dollar. People wanted to see where those monies were going to go this year. And now a huge portion is going to go to look at this cleanup and wildfire prevention and all the things that are involved. And I won't go deep on that because Jennifer's more the expert and knows way more on this, but I think there's that piece of it. Insurance is going to, after we get through all this, got housing in the middle. How do we deal with housing? All of the displaced families and people. How do we deal with the insurance that didn't take care of folks or isn't taking care of them adequately or fully? And so, and California was already having to deal with disasters. We've seen them. We've seen fires across the state and in sort of the last several years, but this is a much larger impact. It is Los Angeles and large swaths of it. And still folks down there, and sorry, certainly sort of know folks on this call are from those areas, still dealing with this today. And it's not even complete yet. And people are already starting to sort of Monday morning quarterback it and figure out what are we going to do and who is at blame and all of those things. But this is going to be the biggest defining issue this year outside of how to deal with the Trump administration. But the Trump administration plays into this. We've already heard at the federal level, Donald Trump doesn't sort of feel like California should be reimbursed or taken care of in disaster because many of these things are what he has indicated is our fault. He does have now Congress. So we're just going to have to, this is just going to be this ongoing fight that just got much quicker, much larger, faster, and it's going to be constant. At the same time, we have, I think it might be the most new members. Someone's going to check me here. It's close to the most new members who have never held entirely new, never held public office before, certainly didn't hold state level office, to the tune of about 25 members. And then we've got members who've switched houses. So we've got so many new members. We still do not have at this point in the session, it's just started, but still we're in it. We still don't have full committee lists for the assembly side. We're waiting on those. It makes it hard to lobby when you don't know who's on your committees, or on the committees that matter. And so I think we knew Trump, new members, budget, all those three things were going to be kind of our trifecta. Now add into this giant sort of disaster that has all of those levels to it. I think there's probably others on our panel that want to chime in here, but those are really going to be huge issues for this legislature and it will define our work, whether we work on health and human services, if we work on climate, what insurance, even if it's health insurance. I mean, all of these things are going to be impacted by this one way or another. I'll stop.
So we'll be busy is what you're saying, Kathy.
That's right.
That's right. A few things in the hopper. Right. Jennifer, what would you chime in on?
I would just add, and I'm particularly seeing this for the environmental space, but I'm sure it has repercussions, a take that many Democrats in California have drawn from the election results, and it's a take business interests and others are fanning the flames of, is that California is not affordable and that California has not done enough to look out for low-income and middle-income workers. I actually will wholeheartedly agree with that. But that will be a challenge and an opportunity. So both advocates for those people have some wind at their back to drive like policy ideas and budget investments that they can credibly connect to like impacting, the affordability crisis, whether it's in housing or food or healthcare or other issues. I think there will be wind at the back of advocates who work on that, but I think it is simultaneously being co-opted by interests who would like to say California that can't afford to further protect the environment or even protect the environment as much as we have, or to further protect prices. There will be a lot of push and pull on that, and there will be kind of a communications arms race, I think, on any idea. Where both sides of every argument here is going to be trying to win members over that they're the affordability side. And whoever wins that war, wins that messaging is likely to prevail, even if other kind of historical or kind of values alignment issues might have driven otherwise. There's a lot of scared of their shadow that I'm experiencing on Democrats, even as I would argue we actually have a more progressive assembly than the last assembly. There are a number of more progressive members who've been elected. It's still as a caucus, and more broadly, there's some protection I think they're going to be driving to try to be, not be open to kind of attacks by Republicans and sort of thinking ahead to future elections. And I'm not attempting to be partisan one way or the other. This is a Democratic supermajority legislature. And so that the politics are driven by Democrats and their sense of what they need to do to remain sort of safe in the next election to either hold that supermajority or grow it. And I think this affordability lens is going to be on everything.
If I could just briefly add, that it's going to be the Hokey Pokey Caucus, because as someone who worked for only new legislators, they're all, like Jennifer was saying, they're all going to be afraid of their shadow, and so no one's going to want to be the cool kids, so they're going to put one foot in and one foot out and shake it all about. And so for this next 2 years, they're just going to try to find themselves, and it's our job as advocates to help them find themselves in this process.
A technical term to add, a hokey pokey caucus. So Dahlia, what would you offer in terms of how you're seeing trends, especially in this session that are relevant to nonprofits?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah, it's sort of everyone kind of highlight the fact that the trends are turbulent right now. And if anything, it's kind of giving me a bit of a flashback to 2020, where we all thought we were going in with one thing, and then things just drastically changed and evolved. And not only were we playing catch up, the members themselves were also playing a good deal of catch up. So, like, yes, top of mind right now would be anything related to the fires. But also looking further down the stretch, it's like, okay, um, with the fires, there's still like the new administration. So it's still very much top of mind that the special session, and even with its expansion, um, it's like the budget. The budget's still very much top of mind, and figuring out like where we all are placed within this budget. Um, and because even going into this year, we were told like no new programs, like no new funding. And then with this extra weight put upon us, like top of mind is definitely going to be the budget, because it'll determine what bills are going to be getting out. Even if something is your darling, and there's this ongoing saying like, don't wedge yourself to your bill. We're really going to have to lean into that this year. So yeah, if anything, it's definitely focusing on the fire, definitely focusing on the budget. But I would encourage folks to not necessarily focus so much on trends, but just be able to be quick to adapt and to evolve with what we see and what we're experiencing here in the legislature. Um, and if anything, I anticipate the fire conversations to continue, because this is January. It's January. We're talking about wildfires. We're not even in the summer. We haven't hit like the state dry season. So if anything, I can anticipate this persisting and growing, if anything. And especially since we saw like other states and even other countries, because I know like Canada and Mexico sent their firefighters up here, and even our incarcerated community is out here fighting these fires. Um, it's not just California we need to worry about, it's like our neighboring states, because they're also very dry areas too. So we might even be faced with the fact that we have to deploy some of California's resources out to other states. And there's going to be like budget allocation discussions for that. And also just trying to figure out like what all the overall impacts for that. So yeah, that's definitely looking further down the line, but it requires our evolution, our flexibility, and our adaptability.
Great advice. Thank you for that perspective. Jennifer, let me pull you back in again as CalNonprofits Sacramento advocate. Amidst all of these trends, these moving pieces, changing priorities, new crises, apparently every day so far, what are our best opportunities for collaboration or for collective action as part of this social sector coalition on the call today?
Yeah, thanks for asking. A couple things come to mind. The first is our ongoing fight for equity in contracting, which I think we will work and appreciate your support in narrating how crises and emergencies drive home the need for that even more, that whether it's flexibility, on-time pay, advance pay, our indirect costs being covered, the things that have been the elements, primary elements of our legislative campaign over the last few years, those ideas and the urgency for CalNonprofits to focus on contracting efficiencies with the state literally came out of a hearing that we had post-COVID, where all the sector folks who came to that hearing here at the Capitol, it just emerged as a theme that to thrive in future emergencies, like we had to address these very kind of wonky, nerdy, seemingly, they're not flashy, jazz hands fixes to the world, but they are truly impacting the degree to which nonprofits are able to successfully and efficiently partner with the state. And the state needs to reckon with just how much they lean, on the sector, whether it's through contracts for service. A third of all Medi-Cal contracts are, delivered by nonprofits. Almost all reproductive, health is delivered by nonprofits, all domestic violence. I mean, we could go on and on. So part of CalNonprofits' job has been, unfortunately, to take circumstances like this and drive home. I know you want to rush out and do like a thing that's, important, that the public will deeply understand off the top. But if you really want to drive the outcomes, like if you want to get there and efficiently and quickly bring services to folks who need it, please remove some of these barriers and improve equity and fairness in contracting. So preview, we're still at it. This is a multi-year effort and we're going to stay on it and work again to weave that into the crises, as one of the things we need to do to adequately support communities through crises like this and the ones that are ahead. I think also on the budget, I think already I see nonprofits often work in big coalitions and collaboratively around the budget. There is a saying in our world, I think I always heard Holly Mitchell, now Supervisor Holly Mitchell, say it when she was budget chair, but our budget is a reflection of our priorities, period. Like where you spend your money is what you care about. So you can pass all the bills and do all the things, but if you're not actually funding implementation or funding enforcement or like actually trying to do the thing with the resources, you're not actually walking your talk. So I do think a lot of common cause across nonprofits in coalitions and communication, shared purposes in terms of driving the state's investment priorities this year, which thankfully are not as bad, as dire, knock on wood. Again, today, the budget does not seem as dire as it has been the last 2 years. So we're not going to be vying for, who gets cut more. It's more trying to hold on to prior investments. And then I guess for philanthropy, again, I think philanthropy often steps in where the government gaps exist for nonprofit partnerships. So finding ways for philanthropy to center and really use your voice with the governor's office, which is, and the governor, who is the one that we have to convince on the contracting issues. I would love, Laura, for us to find a way to more directly deploy philanthropy leaders, because you not only know those issues matter to you because they're so important to the sector, but literally philanthropy becomes like counted on and expected to step in and cover and subsidize shortfalls in government contracts. And I think your money could be going to better things. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. Again, the title of today's session is Lobbyist AMA, Ask Me Anything. We're going to pull in now with 3 minutes left, another internet acronym, TLDR, too long, didn't read. This is for everyone. If someone just tuned in right now, what is the one thing you want them to take away from this session about nonprofit lobbying and advocacy? Jennifer, we'll just start with you and go back down the line.
Sorry about that. I spaced. Can you read that question again?
What's your soundbite, your one thing you want everyone to take away from this call?
There's no such thing as a limit on lobbying, just a target. Please exercise the amount of advocacy you're allowed under the law, the amount of lobbying you're allowed under the law. I think your community and your organization is counting on you to be at the table and not on the menu.
Sedalia, what do you have for us?
Okay. The one thing I didn't talk too much about in the space, but it's very important is your network is everything. Your reputation, your integrity, like folks hinted at the fact that the Capitol functions like a high school in some aspects, where it's very gossipy, very cliquey. Um, and so the fact that you can, and someone did touch upon this part, like you can interact with one member's office or one coalition, and based off that experience, like folks will know about you or hear about you. Um, so like showing up, being present, being kind, um, is always going to be paramount. But when push comes to shove, it's your network of folks that you built that, whether it's through your lobbyists or you do it independently or amongst your coalition of other folks who care about these issues, like that's where you tap in for information. That's where you tap in for your resilience, and strategy and focus. So make sure you always take care and nurture your network, and don't reach out for don't only reach out to folks when you need something. To reach out just to like say hello or to uplift like an interesting article or something like that. But your
Yeah.
network is going to be your grounding system. That's something that, like, give or take, what members have term limits, um, and lots of things change in the building and whatnot. But if your network is solid and it continues to flourish, then that's what's going to also help maintain your presence here.
Great. Christopher, what have you got for us?
Be big, be bold, and be creative. Our job is to figure out what they're going to say yes to, and they're going to tell us no a bunch of times. So do it until they tell you yes.
Thank you for that. Kathy?
And do it at all the levels. I hope what we've shared with you is there's multi-levels in which you can lobby. So, and I think I didn't do enough. I know enough about talking about there's city, there's county, then you've got state, you've got admin lobbying, and then you got fed. And so I think just knowing your voice can be heard at all those levels, wherever you can place it, is very important.
Please join me in thanking Kathy, Christopher, Sedalia, and Jennifer, as well as all the co-hosting organizations of this coalition-driven series. My last plug, join CalNonprofits if you're not already a member, and tune in for future California Policy Forum sessions. This one will be available in your inboxes within a few days, maybe a week at the most, and also will be available online with that archive of past sessions. Thank you for making this time to join us for this conversation, and stay tuned for more California Policy Forums. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day and your week.